Well, I've kicked around a lot since high school. I've worked a lot of nowhere gigs. From keyboard man in a rockin' ska band to Haulin, boss the Crude in the big rigs. Now I've come back home to plan my next move from the comfort of my Aunt Faye's couch. When I see my little cousin Janine walk in, well, all I could say was ouch. Honey, how you've grown like a rose. Well, we used to play when we were 3. How about a kiss for your cousin Dupree? How about a
All right, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Gaucho Amigos. I'm Alex. Today my guest is Rob Delaney. He's an actor and comedian. He starred in and co-wrote the TV show Catastrophe. And more recently, he's been in some big Hollywood blockbusters, such as the most recent Mission Impossible movie. He also played Elvis in the Elton John biopic Rocket Man, but that scene got cut out, unfortunately. He recently published a book, a memoir about coping with the tragic loss of his son, Henry. It's called A Heart That Works and is available wherever you buy books now. And I've personally been aware of Rob, I think like a lot of people, really through his Twitter account. You know, it was one of the first truly inspired accounts on that website. I've been a fan of that for a long time. He's a really, really funny guy. And he's recently become afflicted with a pretty bad case of Dan mania. You know, he's got the Steely Dan bug. I'm sure listeners of this podcast can relate to that. So I thought it would be fun to have him on the pod to hash it out. And yeah, I had a great time talking to Rob about his somewhat recent Steely Dan journey. Before I share our chat, I just wanted to announce that next week, that's exactly 1 week from today, I'll be putting up the first bonus episode of Gaucho Amigos. To get access to that, you will need to subscribe to FM Plus. You can do that on the Apple Podcast feed or directly on the FM Pods website. That's fmpods.com. It's $4.99 a month, and you'll also get access to the entire back catalog of Gaucho Amigos. You may have noticed I've put just about all of the episodes from the first half of this year behind the paywall, save for a few samples. So smash that subscribe button and support the podcast to get all access to that. The crux of the bonus episode will be what is essentially a part 2 of my conversation with Rob Mounsey from a few weeks ago. So if you listened to that episode and enjoyed that, you'll want to tune in. You know, on that episode, we talked a lot about Gaucho tracks, Babylon Sisters, Glamour Profession, and Gaucho. But we talked about some other tracks he worked on with Donald as well, including Third World Man and IGY. So if you want to hear that, plus some other stuff, subscribe today or at least by next Tuesday to get all access. Okay? All right, without further ado, this is my conversation with comedian Rob Delaney. Enjoy.
Well, I'm new-ish, to the disease, so to speak, of Steely Dan fandom. But like a lot of people, I've fallen hard and fast. I think, I don't know if it was during lockdown. It might have been before lockdown. But I certainly did this a lot during lockdown where I just dove into different bands, like, the Beach Boys after Pet Sounds, for example, where there's individual incredible masterpieces that you kind of have to hunt for, or the Bee Gees or Fleetwood Mac before Nixon Buckingham joined. But Steely Dan was one where, when you start to pull a thread, there's just so much more to learn, and it just rewards deeper exploration. It's like there's just so much to learn and enjoy. So I got it bad.
Yeah, it's a journey, as I like to call it, a journey, a Steely Dan journey.
I'm not getting tired of it,
because the groundwork is laid, like you probably know a few of the songs from when you were a kid. So you have
Hmm.
that kind of foundation, but then it's when you go that first level deeper that things
Yeah,
start to like open up, and then you go on the journey. So do you
yeah.
remember like your earliest memory of hearing them?
Oh, sure. So I'm 46 and I
Okay.
grew up in Boston where we had WBCN, which was an amazing station, a big like AOR station from the 70s and then into the 80s. That played them. They also had a little thing that they spliced together of songs that have the word Boston in them. So Boston Rag was in there.
Okay.
And it's funny being from Boston and now I live in London in the UK. When I hear the Boston Rag, it's like deeply important spiritually to me and reminds me of my childhood and all this. So yeah, so I made myself a little mix of songs. Like I just went A to Z through their discography. Let's just say it was early in lockdown, for example, and made a mix. Was particularly struck by the song "Fire in the Hole."
Hmm.
Um, just incredible piano work there by Fagan, and then some slide guitar at the end. I was like, whoa, these guys are. I mean, I knew there were like song crafts people. I'd heard that, the nerdy people that I knew that really loved them. So I was like, oh yeah, but they also know how to, you know, be nasty,
Yeah.
and jam. And so yeah, I was just quite struck by them. And then, you go deeper, you hear a song like Charlie Freak, and you're like, hey, weird. The lyrics are also good and evocative, which is so rare. I mean, I listen to music all day, every day, and I have bands that I'm obsessed with, but usually the music is more important than the lyrics. And I say
Yeah.
that as somebody who's a writer, like I
Yeah.
make my living with words, but usually I'm like, yeah, I don't care about the words. But what's amazing about Steely Dan is it's like the perfect sweet spot of incredible attention and care going into both the lyrics and the music. So they're something else, as you're well aware.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm usually drawn to I don't turn to music because I want to hear like, poems. It's a lot of the times when I'm listening to music, it's kind of in the background, right? You're driving,
Yeah,
you're, trying to get some work done or something. So,
yeah.
but with Steely Dan, there will be like individual lines will just jump out with
Oh
like the turn
yeah,
of phrase or just the reference or the way it's sung is just so
yeah,
striking and the way it all comes together. So you
yeah,
have to you have to investigate further, you know.
yeah. And they're frequently oblique. It's not like, oh, that's what this is about.
Mm.
It actually rewards further thought and analysis, and you don't necessarily come up with an answer. And that's really fun, especially as someone who writes. Like, I love to leave a reader with questions, you
Yep.
know, and they do that. So it's just, yeah, it's a special band.
Yep. When you were taking this deeper dive, like, and you were getting into the lyrics, were there any songs that you were taking, like, that you were investigating, or that you were, really wondering, like, what does this mean? What is this about? Any examples in particular?
All right. Well, of course, I mentioned Charlie Freak. I was
Yep.
like, oh my God, that's like beautiful. What? Like poignant, so that was very special. Deacon Blues. I mean, I want to name when I lose. Just somebody thinking really in like mythologizing their own loserhood is fun, I mean, and I think people can relate to that a lot more than they can relate to, somebody singing about being the king of the world, you know. Um, although that's a great song too. Um, in fact, it also Cousin Dupree, because people are like, "Whoa, what's that about?" You catch a few of the lyrics, but then you realize it's not saying hey, you should have sex with your cousin, or hey, wouldn't it kind of be funny if you sort of had sex with your cousin? It's like a scathing, brutal indictment of this guy. Like it's like scorched earth at the end. This guy just sucked and is just disassembled
Yeah, that
by
one
his little
they don't
cousin.
leave much to the imagination. Like in I feel like Everyone's Gone to the Movies is another song about like a total,
Hmm.
sick pervert. And that one, it's a
Hmm.
little bit
Hmm.
like the lyrics are
Hazier,
less
yeah,
direct, yeah. But on Cousin Dupree, they don't leave anything too
I
ambiguous.
know. But then it's also fine to be a scumbag here and there too, because it's not like they definitely are assuming a lot of personalities and characters and stuff in their lyrics, and it's fine to write about somebody who does bad things and put a funky beat to it. That's okay. That's life.
Yeah, it's more of like I mean, I think people just aren't used to that in music. Like when someone like a singer-songwriter, you're assuming the person singing the song is assuming the role of the narrator.
Yeah,
But that's not how they
yeah.
do it necessarily,
Oh,
right?
certainly not. Yeah.
Soon you will be 18. I think you know what I mean. Don't tell your mama, your daddy, or mama. They'll never know where you've been. Everyone's gone to the movies. Now we're alone at last. Everyone's gone to the movies. Now we're alone at last.
I saw a tweet you posted. You said, I'm a fucking mess right now. I'm listening to Steely Dan all day and night and reading a book about them too. Never been happier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because like for example, my wife was like, "Come on, man," I'm like talking about him to my friends,
Imagine
like
how
I've
mine
got this,
feels, Rob.
yeah, right. um, and so, but look, I even have on stage have been talking about it, doing stand up about how, having a midlife crisis. And Steely Dan's a great midlife crisis band because, I mean, it seems like they just kind of played through it. You know what I mean? Like they're a wonderful way. I mean, look, I'm not going to buy a Ferrari. I've got kids. I got to raise. I don't drink alcohol or do drugs, so I'm not going to do that. But like, getting just going super vertical into a band that doesn't even make music anymore. I mean, like,
Yep.
Fagan is torn right now, but whatever. I'm not hurting anybody, just having a good time.
Yeah. There was actually, I think, something about the pandemic where like everything kind of stopped. So newness wasn't as valued as, as it usually is. And maybe people were more inclined to
Yeah.
kind of go back to things that they were a little bit familiar with or like to the past and kind of really
Hmm.
do a deep dive on something, right? So, and then
Yeah.
obviously some of the bands like the Beach Boys are a great example because they have such a weird catalog of, again, I Get Around, Good Vibrations, but
Yeah.
there are all these other weird things that they did, Pet Sounds, and some of the albums
Yeah.
after that are great. So,
And Pet Sounds being rightfully lauded as many people think it's the best album ever made. I would
yeah,
not argue with anybody on that. I'm crazy about it.
yeah,
But after that, when Brian Wilson started to spin out and the others did whatever they were doing, you can still assemble a couple albums worth of total masterpieces from the stuff, but it's piecemeal after Pet Sounds. And another thing about like studio psychopaths like Brian Wilson, the Beatles, and Steely Dan is, as somebody who works in a creative field, it is, I think, worthwhile, instructive, inspiring to be into a band like Steely Dan who says like it's okay to truly give a shit and really care. And, they're thinking stuff like, all right, if they're writing songs about Charlie Parker and they know, the entire history of jazz. Have you heard Fagan? I'm sure you have. Talk about I can't remember the director's name, but who made La La Land and Whiplash. And he's making fun of saying like saying that he says white people invented jazz. Yeah, I'm sure he didn't, but he's just ripping on him.
Yeah, he was going after Damien Chazelle for La La
That's
Land.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I because I have so many children, I haven't seen everything that happened, so I can't defend or indict Damien Chazelle. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's what the reason I brought it up is because Fagan is a notorious student of jazz and stuff, and so they care, and they're like a Steely Dan would go on a stage and be like, "Hey, you know what? Charlie Parker played here. We better bring it." You know what I mean? So they just
Yeah.
have a respect for history, and they're also that wonderful union of like, learn all the rules so you can forget them in terms
Mm.
of their knowledge of musical theory and all that is like bananas. But then sometimes they'll do just something nasty like Monkey in Your
Oh
Soul.
yeah, Monk and yourself. Yeah.
It's just like fart in a trash can bass. They're just having fun.
I got one and you want four. It's so hard to help you. I can't keep up with you no more. And you treat me like it's a sin. But you can't lock me in. You want me here with you right to the end. No, thank you, my friend. I feel the monkey in your soul.
Do you think that there's actually something to someone going through a midlife crisis and listening to Steely Dan? Like, because that trope comes up a lot. What do you think it is about
It's,
middle-agedness and a love of Steely Dan?
I mean, for me, what it would be
Yeah.
is that, so I'm hearing something from my own childhood. So, I mean, middle age crisis means like you realize, whoa, there might be more in the rearview mirror than there is coming
Mm.
up, right? I think I had to go out and I had to listen to stuff um like post bop jazz, heavy metal, um outlaw country, all kinds of stuff. Like I had to go through it looks like I had to go through 4.5 decades of learning about other kinds of music to find, holy mackerel, there's this band that actually does it all, and puts it all together in a very beautiful way. So I think that could possibly be a factor.
Yeah.
Um, my ability to appreciate them, I guess it took a while to develop to be able to appreciate them as much as I do now.
Yeah. As an artist yourself, do you think that there's something to like you were saying, Donald really taking things seriously? Is that something you value like as an artist in
Definitely.
particular? And why?
And I can really relate to it, and I can relate to creative partnerships as well, duos, because
Mm.
I wrote 4 seasons of a TV show called Catastrophe with
Yeah.
the amazing Sharon Horgan. So that was a thing where we were pushing each other to greater heights to the best of our abilities. We both knew that the other party involved, even if their idea might have been different, we both had the best interest of the project in mind, and we would revise and revise and revise. We did try to hire other writers to help us by the time the third season came along, and we wound up not doing it. We were like, we got to do it all ourselves. Not that
Really?
these guys weren't great, and they
Right.
really were, but they just didn't have. So I can relate to somebody being like, "Oh man, whatever. Rick Derringer did a great job, but why don't we see what Elliot Randall has to do, or something like that?" Because, and then we were super hyper specific about the script. Like there's no improvising in Catastrophe
Really?
because we do it all beforehand. We did it in the room, and then locked it and didn't critically um, have the millions of dollars behind us and the cocaine and the like largesse of the 70s, where we had to get to set ready to rock,
Yeah.
and I do wonder, there's a version, I'm sure, and this is, I'm sure, a sacrilege to Steely Dan fans. There's a version of Asia where they had a quarter of the money and a quarter of the time, and
Yeah.
it would still be amazing, but it would be a different kind of amazing. Um, so there's that. I wrote a book that came out last year that I worked super closely with an editor, who I had a great relationship with. So I love to work like on one-on-one creative projects, and I get it, because you've got to be obsessive about certain aspects. The best thing to do is to be obsessive about some aspects and to be totally loose and free with others. And figuring out that what balance of that works for you.
I think one thing that I really appreciate about like what you do, and also I guess what Donald does is I feel like you don't really like make concessions. Like you're always really, really authentic and true to your beliefs, like in your political beliefs, and then like on Twitter. Why do you think you value authenticity to the degree that you do?
Okay, I understand this is a podcast about Steely Dan,
Yeah.
but the real answer to that
Yeah.
is and for listeners who are like tuning in for Steely Dan stuff,
Yeah.
you may be aware that my son Henry died 5 years ago, and he died. For anybody who doesn't know, he died of a brain tumor, and he was sick for some years before that. And so that was happening at the same time. Like, he got sick not long after I got my first TV show on the air. So it was, people were starting to learn who I was, and I was like
Yeah.
emerging into the public eye on a bigger level. At the same time, something really awful was happening in my life. So
I'm so sorry about that. That's yeah.
thank you. And so for me, I don't really take credit for the fact that, because I agree with you, I do say what I mean. I don't really worry if it's going to be sort of, unpopular in certain strata or whatever. Because something so bad happened to me that was so much worse than like a bad review,
Right.
or you know having to tighten my belt between paychecks or something like that. It was so much worse than that. So now I don't, that's the thing, I don't care if one day an employer is like, oh yeah, he's too outspoken. I'm like, well, all right.
Right.
I'll just go do stand up. Or if people in TV are like, yeah, he's a live wire. Okay, I'll go write a book. Like,
Maybe that's why Twitter was a good
because
medium for you because it was unfiltered, like this.
yeah, maybe. And then also, I a bit yeah, things like Twitter or Instagram, like, are so silly that anytime something new gets invented, I always want to use it in the silliest manner, because people will be like, oh, it's so revolutionary. What a breakthrough in the way to communicate. And I'm like, no, man, like, even if that is true, you
Right.
still have to do silly stuff. I think any new thing must be stress tested with extreme silliness, so that we don't take ourselves too seriously. So I think anything that I say or do or make a commitment to publicly or link myself with or whatever, it's based in the fact that, a really terrible thing happened to our family. So I just don't care about sort of quotidian consequences.
Right.
And you see it happen. And like, I'm always, when somebody like gets in trouble in the public eye, I'm like, why don't you just turn off your phone for a couple weeks,
Yeah.
because also people forget so fast, and they feel
Sure.
like a big example to me is a bunch of companies dropped Michael Phelps because he got photographed with a bong. And I was like, oh, they're going to regret that. I mean, fuck them. I don't care about these
Yeah.
big publicly traded companies. But I was like, that's a bad business decision, because in
Right.
a few weeks, people are going to forget that he smoked a bong. But you know what? He'll still be the best swimmer who ever lived. And you're gonna wish that he was still selling sneakers for you. You know what I mean?
You zombie, be born again, my friend. Won't you sign in strange?
I listened to a podcast the other day where some guys were listening to the Royal Scam, and they got to Sign In Stranger, and they were like, "Now I'm not nuts about this song," and I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, are you crazy?" I mean, to me, that's like one of their best songs because it's not Fagan on piano. I forget who it is.
Yeah, Paul Griffin.
Paul Griffin.
Yeah.
And then who's playing the drums on that?
They, for the Royal Scam, they've never actually listed the individual players on the tracks. It might be Bernard Purdy because he plays on a lot of that album, but it's not confirmed.
So
I know that Paul Griffin is the pianist. Yeah.
I mean, the duet or the interplay between the piano and the drums on that for me is that's like going to psycho class. I mean, it's so ferocious, both individually, then playing off of each other. Then, like, quick little horn section. How do you do near the end? I mean, I'm insane about that song. So I wanted to threaten the guys who did that, which it's a great podcast. And in fact, but it's also fun to passionately disagree with people about things and make a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah, I absolutely fucking love. That's one of my favorites, Steely Dan songs, I think. So I'm with you. It's just so good. I love the lyrics too because it's kind of sci-fi. It reminds me a little bit of Philip K. Dick. It's like
Turkish Union dues.
How do they come up with some of those? Yeah. Have you heard about the boom on Mizar 5?
Mizar 5, baby.
The opening line is one of the best opening lines, I think, of a Steely Dan song. What are some of your other just favorite tracks? I guess you've named a few, Fire in the Hole, Charlie Freak.
Yeah, well, you know what I cannot listen to enough is the song itself, Everything Must Go. I'm really crazy about that song. I love the saxophone on that. It's kind of reminds me of who's the guy? I'll think of it. But that's a really beautiful melody in that. That's kind of climbing and aspirational. I think that song is very special, and I really love that it's their last song. As Steely Dan.
Do you think they knew that was going to be the end? Because there's some speculation that they knew that was going to be their last album and the last song.
I mean, I'll tell you what, you couldn't pick a better one, and it is a swan song, kind of by any definition. So if they did, then they chose wisely with that one. But it would also be fun. I don't know. Even if it was like Your Gold Teeth 3 was the last one, or and then I love the song Third World Man. I know, there are people who complain, especially with the reemergence of or rediscovery of the second arrangement, that would have been a better way to go out. But I guess I was just so used to Third World Man as the end, and I really like that's darkness and sadness. Also, anything dark and sad. I listen to a lot of dark and sad music as well. So anytime Steely Dan goes dark, I'm like, can't.
Yeah, they're good at it.
Can't get enough. Jack of Speed. I love that song.
Yeah.
The last two albums I've finally started to crack. They were harder for me. I'm
glad you picked something off Everything Must Go, because of the 9 Steely Dan albums, that's the one that gets, like, from what I've seen, by far the least amount of chatter and attention. And it's a great album. So
and that song in particular for me is one of their best. Also, I don't know if you've spoken about it on here, but it's so funny to me how how explicitly. So for guys as unbelievably, created out of whole cloth, just masters of composition, that they explicitly broad daylight ripped off Keith Jarrett with the song Gaucho. Because if you listen to Long As You Know, whatever the song that it is,
Yeah.
do you know the title of it off the top of your head?
It's like Long As You Know You're Living Yours or something.
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah.
It's bananas to hear those two side by side. It's like and it's to the point that it's funny that guys that good at what they do just for like, yeah, this is also ours.
They actually probably would have gotten away with it because after the release of Gaucho, there was nothing. And then I think it was in a year or two later in an interview, the interviewer actually brought it up. He was like, that piano riff on Gaucho sounds really similar to a Keith Jarrett song. And they kind of deflected, but basically admitted that they stole it because I think they wanted to show that like they could get away with it because they were Donald and Walter, and they got sued. So
funny. And then years later, and they had to recoup their losses by suing all hip hop samplers.
Yeah, that's so fucking hypocritical.
Yeah, I know. It's funny.
Yeah.
But it's also, hey man, they're human beings, and it's it'd be boring if they were. It's fun. That's another great thing about them. They're weird guys, and that's great.
Well, anytime your entire life is going to be like, because they do inspire a sort of obsessive fandom. So people, hold a microscope up to every single decision they ever made. And if you do that, over the, and they started when they were really young. So if you do that over the span of, of a whole life, you're going to find stuff that's not always going to be, but, one other thing I want to ask you. So, do you think, because you've had a lot of success with Twitter, right? I think that really helped launch your career, right? Your comedy career.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And the whole Steely Dan kind of being back in, it feels like Steely Dan has kind of been more omnipresent recently. I think a lot of it is because they're big on Twitter. Do you think that there's something related there, like something in Steely Dan makes it conducive to a Twitter phenomenon? I don't know.
Yeah, I do, because they're quite particular, right? But it's like everybody knows them a little bit, but the more you learn, the more you're rewarded. So it is kind of the perfect sort of wormholey thing for somebody to, because plus how everybody has their weird little niches on the internet, and little silos that they get into. Steely Dan is quite a rewarding one, and then, I mean, they would probably be popular on Twitter anyway for like the way Walter Becker looked and dressed in the 70s. You know what I mean? That's like tailor made because he looks weird as hell, but cool too. He looks like 75% weird, 20% cool, and 5% totally doesn't care what you think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he has a beard, yet he looks a little bit like a teenage girl with like beautiful long straight hair, glasses that every single one of us had one or two uncles that wore, like, prescription tinted sunglasses, and like, they are, I would say, pretty ideally suited for that type of thing, or like Donald with a Snapple. It's that type of, you can get like you get a whole world from any snapshot of Donald and Walter in their heyday that is sort of fun to explore through a quirky online lens,
Yeah. Their features kind of complement each other. Walter has a very round head and Donald's is extremely rectangular. So I don't know.
Yeah.
He has that big mouth, and then Walter has kind of small facial features. So I don't know.
But so easy to caricature.
Yeah, exactly.
And
It's funny you say
and
uncle
then
because a lot of your jokes are like, like my uncle Kevin, or right?
yeah,
You do these
yeah,
kind of characters that are usually like fringe relatives, right? Is that
yeah. I don't know why.
how did you start doing that? Just
I'm not really sure. I think
yeah,
like because I mean I'm always thinking about like family and stuff, but the people who are
yeah.
just one step removed are just always a little weirder and funnier, like a cousin or an uncle, because like you know them, but you don't know them that well. So there's like danger with like cousins and uncles,
Yeah,
like,
cousin
oh, what
Dupree.
happened? Well, yeah, my cousin Ricky, oh Christ, where's this gonna go? Um, so they're kind of, yeah, cousins and uncles. It's sort of like they're like the uncanny valley you know what I mean? Because like
Right.
you meet someone's cousin or uncle and they look like them, but like it's a little off, and so it's immediately funny.
How about a kiss for your cousin Dupree? How about a kiss for your cousin Dupree? How about a kiss for your cousin Dupree?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, I get another thing I would like to say is,
Sure.
to just mount a kind of aggressive defense of like the first two albums, or three, I guess, before
Yeah.
they sort of become more what they're known for,
Yeah.
by the heavy duty fans, because I think that there again is an alternate world. They were such an amazing band when they were a band by the sort of normal standards, that if and it's up and look, I'm glad they did what they did. It's obviously we really probably wouldn't be here talking about this if they hadn't. But I think there's an amazing sort of parallel band where they did, roughly keep together a similar lineup, did um, freak out less in the studio, in a less despotic manner, uh, where they could have become something incredibly wonderful, but yes, very different. Um, you know, because like their first album is unbelievable, as is their second one when they're more of a collective. I know Walter and Donald are still driving the bus, but hearing like the filthy, filthy guitar of Skunk Baxter,
Yeah.
um, cutting loose, and not being like granularly guided,
Yeah.
is very wonderful. So I guess there's sort of like two bands, I suppose. There's
Yeah.
before and after, and they're both incredible. But
It's also great to hear just like because Skunk isn't someone I think they would have chosen. I mean, they didn't choose to have him play on those later
yeah,
albums. So it's cool to hear
yeah,
Donald and Walter's songs in like a more, when they're a rock and roll band. And unfortunately there's a few bootlegs. There's only a few, but they're great.
yeah.
If you ever want to listen to some of those live shows, they're pretty great. They rip.
With Skunk.
Yeah, well, they actually in
Yeah.
'74 they were touring as an 8-piece band with two
Okay.
drummers and Skunk and Denny and Michael
Yeah.
McDonald when he was really young is also in that
Ooh.
band. And they're
Yeah.
there's a couple bootlegs and they're incredible. Like they're ripping.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Maybe you could lead me in that direction,
I'd be happy to. Yeah,
when we're off the air.
yeah, yeah, sure.
But here's the thing, though, is what
Yeah,
I would say to them, in the
yeah,
fantasy world where they call
yeah.
me in to help produce or engineer, which, one little butterfly wing movement, and that's could have happened, is I would say when you have somebody like Skunk Baxter playing just filthy garbage, I mean, beautiful, incredible muscular guitar like that,
yeah.
it contrasts to the more studied, angular, smoother
Mm,
stuff, and can make it look more beautiful.
right.
So there's real value in having a guitar player lose his mind, and be free to do whatever he wants, or more of what he wants. I think can kind of highlight some of the stuff that you might have thought it would bury or overpower. I think that it
Yeah,
could be.
it's also interesting to see how Skunk's trajectory. I don't know how much you know about Skunk Baxter, but he ended up becoming a consultant for the Pentagon.
I do know that, and
Yeah,
that's way beyond fascinating.
yeah, and it was like his
Um,
obsession with like analog recording. It was that same part of
mhm.
the brain that led him into
Yeah,
like
yeah,
weapons defense. It's just funny to see how like the same Stu that was building those early Steely Dan records ended up going in a
yeah,
completely
yeah.
uh you know
Yeah,
a
but of
different
course you
direction.
do have to rein a guy like Skunk in because you hear his solo album and then you're like, oh boy,
Yeah.
he's a guy who
Oh,
does benefit from some serious guardrails.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm a lot of people that worked with Steely Dan did great work, but
Yeah.
I see some of these guys that were, they're session musicians or engineers, and they've been in the
Mhm.
music business for their whole life. But the thing that they tend to get asked the most about, or that people
Yeah.
know them from, is often, even if they only played on a few songs, is from Steely Dan. So there's something about
Yeah.
how Walter and Donald were, utilizing their skills that,
Right.
just they knew what to do in this, in a way that something about the
Yeah.
alchemy of whatever was going on in those studio sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Well, it's kind of, I don't know. It's like if, I don't know, a mediocre band from the 70s, is a lays a big egg. And you're like, yep, that's an egg, all right. But then Steely Dan is like this amazing Fabergé egg that you can open up and be like, what is going on in there? And there's
right.
like, like a mechanical horse and cart and little jewel firework display. Like that's why they're so fun, is because there's such detail. There's
Yeah,
so many layers. Like if you really heard them like build a song track by track, it's mesmerizing because of the attention to detail that goes into it. Kind of funny I think about like Born to Run,
yeah,
by Bruce Springsteen. He was became like a sort of Becker and Fagan in the studio for an album like that, but it
yeah.
sounds so different. I mean, of course it does. He's a different person, but it's
No,
just
but I know
interesting
what
to
you
think
mean. It's
about.
not like you're saying, it's not the egg, right? It's more.
No, it's not the Fabergé egg. I mean, it's an album I enjoy, but it's
Yeah,
not. I don't know. In my opinion, and I
yeah,
like Bruce Springsteen a lot,
sure.
it doesn't necessarily reward sort of forensic, going over it with a
Yeah.
black light and fingerprinting it and all that.
Well, it's interesting to think about like the rock album is it's a representation of a band, right? Maybe the band
Yeah.
is the thing first, the live band.
Yeah.
And like Bruce, there's so
Yeah.
much character and performance in what he does.
True.
Whereas Steely Dan, they were crafting an album. It was almost like they were making a movie. It was
Yeah.
its own art
Yeah.
form, separate from like what the
Hmm.
band was. The band didn't even exist in the later years. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Two tri-state. I mean, there's a lot of these guys that grew up around the same time, and like Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen,
Yeah.
Donald, these sort of New York area, they all weirdos that went on to have
Oh yeah.
rock star success.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see
The way that they
the way it
do
all.
it.
Yeah.
I wonder if there was any crossover with them and Lou Reed, just experientially or friendship wise or anything. Would you know anything about that?
Uh, I don't think they were friends. I can pretty
Mm.
safely say that, but I know they were fans of the Velvet Underground, at least at some point. I don't think I'm making this up. I think Donald and Walter, or at least Walter, saw the Velvet Underground live in like 1967
Hmm.
or 68. I'm
Okay.
pretty sure that happened, and they were fans at
Hmm.
first, and then I think like they quickly lost interest. Like they
Hmm.
can be very dismissive of things that now when we sit back, we look back, we say, oh, that their whole discography is incredible. But like when you're
Yeah.
reading these quotes of interviews of Donald, it's like, yeah, they did one interesting album, and then I
Yeah.
lost interest because I don't know. They were just kind of pretentious music, musos or whatever.
Yeah, the only reason I think about
Yeah,
Lou Reed is because he became quite a gearhead and a studio weirdo after the Velvet Underground. But that wave might have crested after the mid '70s, and also being like a brill building
mm,
songwriter. You know what I mean? Like Lou Reed had amazing songwriting chops that were very
totally.
evident, and they go through all his stuff as weird as he ever got. So I guess I just think that there are a couple pretty serious parallels between
Oh,
them. So it would have
definitely.
been fun if they
If
would have
they
been fun to force them to collaborate at
had,
gunpoint or something.
yeah, that's another like two trajectories that went in different. Because if you listen to, God, I hate to be a nerd about this, but if you listen to the Brill Building songs, the demos that Becker and Fagan recorded while they were
Yeah,
songwriters at the Brill Building, it sounds a
yeah,
lot like kind of almost closer to like Lou Reed songs because it's
yeah,
taking like the sort of R&B and
yeah,
soul that they
yeah,
heard on the radio and then putting really fucking weird lyrics and like songs
yeah.
about drug dealers
Oh
and
no, I mean,
you
man,
know
that's a huge compliment that anybody, including Fagan and Becker, should be proud to receive.
I know. I know. Yeah.
Oh, let me tell you about a Steely Dan or a Donald Fagan fantasy that I have, and it's
Okay.
mostly non-sexual. But I am blown away, like blown against the wall by
Yep.
how improbably good David Crosby's last four or so albums are.
Yeah.
Um, like it's like we like what? Like you're on your I see was he on his third liver and he's like 80 and he's so exploring. He's not doing like what Rod Stewart does, which is like farts out an album of saccharine standards that
Right.
sucks, like
Yeah.
um but he is doing incredibly like forward thinking collaborative jazz rock and roll, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware that Fagan wrote a song for him on his last album. But what I was thinking is because of the mutual respect between Fagan and Crosby, and Crosby's albums are all produced by his son, those last few albums. I was thinking, and how good Rodriguez for a Night is, the song that Fagan wrote for David Crosby. I
Right.
was thinking Fagan and Crosby's son should just get together and jam. A, for me personally, but B, they would probably have fun and it would make something good. And I think they would be kindred spirits.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if they're, well, I know I mean, Crosby played a show with them, a couple shows with them
Yeah,
right towards the end there. And
nuts.
I don't, and I know Fagan was briefly touring with some of the younger guys. Like he was touring
Mm-hmm.
with this group. This was actually right around the time when Walter passed away in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
That summer, he was touring with this little group called the Night Flyers that was just like
Yeah,
musicians in like the Woodstock area. So I know he's open
yeah,
to collaborating with sort of like, more forward thinking or
okay,
younger guys with chops.
yeah,
But yeah, I don't know, Donald, I don't know. These days, I don't, at least post pandemic, he hasn't really been into any kind of risk taking. He's just like they're doing
oh
Steely
sure,
Dan. It's the
yeah,
same band. I don't know if it's an age thing. I mean, he's getting up there, so or
oh
if he's
god,
just
yeah.
tired. He's not. But he did apparently write new songs and is planning on recording another album at some point. So
Oh, that's amazing.
which is
Yeah,
great.
forgive me. I hate it. I hate to refer to somebody as David Crosby's son. His name is James Raymond,
Okay.
and he's obviously a gifted producer. So my
Yeah.
fantasy music camp, whatever,
Yeah.
would be that Fagan and James Raymond get together and make an album, or three or four. It doesn't have to be just one. Here I am aiming low when really.
Yeah, and they're beautifully produced. I mean, some of those Crosby songs also sounded a lot like Steely Dan because I know he's a
Oh
huge
yeah.
admirer of Donald. And there was one song where it was just like he's just doing Donald. Like it was just straight up a Donald Fagen
Yeah, and you know
song.
what? I love that. I love that because David
Yeah,
Crosby, I mean, he's a guy whose oeuvre it rewards exploration. I mean,
it does. Yeah.
amazing singer and songwriter, and that he unabashedly is like loves Steely Dan is so cool. You know, I mean, when people are
Yeah.
really open and about what they admire
Yeah.
and allow themselves to be influenceable, especially when you're that huge, is really cool.
Yeah, that he was showing such incredible appreciation of someone who's arguably less famous than him. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like
Yeah,
he was like Bruce Springsteen is a god or Bob Dylan. It was like, no, Donald Fagen
yeah,
is a rung
yeah,
below in terms of just,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
name recognition.
yeah,
Donald, but he was like, no, like my hero is
yeah,
my musical hero is Donald Fagen.
yeah.
Here's a
So
song that
good.
I'm trying to do Donald Fagen. Yeah, and
Yeah.
his voice, it was amazing right up until the end. Like his voice never really lost it. So
Oh
yeah.
man.
I once rode with an angel through the whole royal cold dry run until one day she made it clear that I could never be the one. And then she met the outlaw Rodriguez. It was then that her heart took flight. Well, I would sell my soul if I could only be Rodriguez. Just one night. I confess he had some qualities that might attract a foolish girl. An effortless charisma and a clever way with the world. Now, I'm just a drugstore cowboy. You know I'll never be Mr. Right. Still, I'd sell my soul if I could only be Rodriguez. Just one night. In the course of time, I married, decided to settle down.